Hey there, geographers, it's Angela here, and I've got this really short just lesson on snapshotting what folk, or what we could call, maybe sometimes people call it global, but the idea that a while ago, right, folk culture or local culture was created because people weren't able to move as quickly as we can today. So when you had a city or a village that were separated, it took longer to get from point A to point B. And then what happened is that habits that people had in these villages became customs, and customs became culture. And this example of Las Chinampas in Mexico, in the Valley of Mexico, is one of the most beautiful examples of how culture was created, especially folk culture is rooted in one place, in a singular place, because the people grow in their culture around their natural environment. So Mexico is a place that I love to go. It's one of my favorite places. Now, if you have not been to the Valley of Mexico, which is a huge valley that lies high in elevation in between two mountain ranges, and here you will find where the majority of the Mexican population lives, in the Valley of Mexico. And they live mostly around the capital, which is Mexico City. Mexico City is actually built on a giant lake. Many of you will say, I don't believe you. It was. Before the Spanish came, this image of what you're looking at now is what Mexico City and around Mexico City used to look like. All of the water and all of the rain drained very nicely into the middle of this area called the Valley of Mexico. And today, the most populated city in the Western Hemisphere resides on once a natural lake located in the Valley of Mexico. And this is what it looks like today. So this is the middle of Mexico City, and many just call it Mexico. Where are you from? People will say Mexico. And Mexico also means I am from Mexico City. Now, in the middle of Mexico City, you will see a large map that looks like this. This is letting people know who come to this space that this is what this area that currently looks like this in the surrounding areas used to be mapped out like this, with water surrounding it and people living on small patches of land that were created literally on a lake. So in 1519, this is what the Valley of Mexico looked like. It was a giant lake. And here what you're seeing is these images are represented by marshes, and these images are represent what we call chinampas. Chinampas are a Spanish word for floating gardens, also means floating farming. So the area that you're looking at here, Tenochtitlan, was the Aztec village or Aztec giant city, which is today what we know as Mexico City. And you will see here that the yellow is represented by land and everything around it is water. This was all before Spanish colonization. This is what the Valley of Mexico looked like. It's very high in elevation, and all of the water, there are mountains on the east side and mountains on the west side. So you can imagine that when the water drains, it drains down into this valley and created this beautiful lake. Here is a map that shows you the differences of where the Valley of Mexico was and this lake was located here prior to 1519, And here is that same image of that border of where the lake was located on top of what is today Mexico City, the most populated area in the Western Hemisphere today. So you might ask yourself, how did this happen? Here is what we know as today's Mexico City, the capital of the nation of Mexico. And this city is located high in a valley that's called a mountain valley. Again, you will see here that the capital of Mexico City is located here. Here you will also see a map that represents the population of Mexico, showing you that the majority of the Mexican population lives within the Valley of Mexico, most notably in and around Mexico City. Mexico City is home to over 21 million people and holds 20% of Mexico's entire population. Sits on the site of an Aztec lake named Lake Texcoco. And here is what a current image of Mexico City looks like today. Mexico City was built right on top of Tenochtitlan. So when you go to Mexico today, you will find that you can buy tickets and you can go to areas that show you where they have unearthed the remnants and the parts of the city, the ancient Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, that are still visible, but used to look like this with waterways in between them. This that's encircled here is the location of today's Mexico City, and at this time was the capital city for the Aztec Empire, known as Tenochtitlan. Here are more images of how this would have looked at this time. Obviously, we do not have photos for us to even look at, to imagine what it would have looked like when the Spanish arrived and they saw this, or to be a person who lived during that time. Can you even imagine a place where the city was in the middle of a lake and you got to it by passageways or boats and you lived around on a little piece of land? Now, at this time in Europe, people were not able to live in cities of this size. And here in the Western United States, in what was considered to Europeans undiscovered, right? And they use the word savage and uncivilized. You had a city that was feeding itself and, quite frankly, very successful. Here is another image of if we would have been able to go there and see what this place looked like. This is what you would see where people lived, where they farmed, how they were able to get to the middle of the city, and again, temples, because they were their religion was they worship gods. And yes, you will see the blood dripping down. Yes, it to us it seems very barbaric. At that time they did worship gods and they did give sacrifices. So here today is another image of the city of Tenochtitlan and where it stands in today's Mexico City. Here is a video if you'd like to watch it. It's called A City on a Lake. It's very beautiful. And then Spain invaded and imposed their culture, their way of building cities. So here you have the people who lived here, and here you have the Spanish. Now, the Aztecs made their space, they made where they lived according to the landscape they had been given. The Spanish had their idea. So this is the idea that they took their culture and they superimposed it on a place that had a different language, a different religion, and a different landscape, a different climate. They took their idea of how to grow crops and how to make buildings and how to live, got rid of everything that the Aztecs were doing and brought their idea. So their folk culture was endemic to where they were from in Spain. So they brought that idea to what was considered the New World. We might want to ask ourselves that same question. Why in Southern California, that's a desert, do we have lawns? Where did that idea come from? Came from Western Europe, where they have a lot of rain. Why is it that we're doing that? It's because that idea was brought over from Europeans. Here are more images. So what happened was that the Aztecs actually farmed and were able to make food on these chinampas. Now, today in the southern part of the Valley of Mexico, there is a huge movement to keep this culture and this way of farming alive. The Aztecs provided food for a city that was 4 times the size of London during that same time period. How were they able to accomplish this? They accomplished this because what they did was they put reeds around an area, filled it with soil, and then they farmed on these and they got around the water using kayaks. You guys, this didn't require sprinklers. This didn't require rain. The crops were all watered from underneath. So there was no watering needed. The crops got the water they needed from underneath. This gentleman here, I forget if he's Dutch, can't remember. He is trying to make sure that this way of life is sustained because it is very sustainable and it worked. You might want to think to yourself about how some of these ideas of culture stopped, but yet how can we also bring them back?